Hi everybody, this is Kathy Spitzoff. In this lecture, we're going to look at the movement in the history of graphic design called modernism. This period had distinct ideals concerning what is valuable in a design. Modernist design continues to be a powerful influence on today's designers and still shapes what is taught to design students. It is my hope that you will gain an understanding of the concepts and the principles that were behind modernism. As a design student, it is not enough for you to be able to understand how to imitate the appearance or the techniques that modernists used, but you should understand why they designed that way and why they made the design choices that they did. So let's look at some slides. Usually, when somebody says that something is modern, they mean that it's current or of today. When we talk about modernism with a capital M, it refers to a particular period following World War I. During that war, Europe had experienced tremendous chaos and destruction. When the war ended, intellectuals and designers started to rethink the fundamental goals of art, culture, and architecture. They developed new ideals by which to critique their work, which they dreamed would change society for the better. The approximate dates for modernism are the 1920s through the 1970s. What came before modernism? Every movement is a reaction to what came before it. In the case of modernism, there was a rebellion against recycling of historic forms, against the acceptance of tradition, against anything that was decorative. They rebelled against things that were in any way sentimental or impractical, which they considered the design of the periods of Art Nouveau and the arts and crafts style, which came right before modernism. So what were the things that influenced the modernists? If you want to understand modernism, you could further research these things that we're going to touch on. You could start with the philosophy of rationalism, which taught that reason was the chief source of knowledge. Modernists admired the machine aesthetic, the elegance of things that were streamlined, made of metal, powerful. The artistic and architectural movement of constructivism was an influence on modernism. This was a movement that favored art for social purposes. The Bauhaus School put a great emphasis on materials and process and raised craft and design to the level of fine art. The international style of architecture, with its rectilinear forms and clean surfaces free of ornamentation. What ideas did modernism embrace? It embraced the utilitarian. Function should always dictate form. Industrialized culture. The aesthetics of speed. Standardization. The modern age, efficiency, and universal truths. During this time, some designers, such as Jan Tschichold, solidified their ideas by coming up with a set of rules. Tschichold wrote the book The New Typography in 1928, in which he discussed 10 principles or convictions about design. Some of these principles are: design for clarity and ease of use. For example, flush type is easier to read as an alignment, so that is the preferred styling. Color must be used for functional reasons, not for making things pretty. There should be economy in type design. Typefaces should not be decorative. Sans serif fonts were preferred over traditional serif fonts, as they had a cleaner design. Modernism put great emphasis on the underlying grid upon which the elements of a page were laid out. The grid allowed for a standardization from page to page within a publication and provided a framework to unite disparate elements. White space became emphasized as an important part of a composition. The weight of the negative space, or white space, balanced the type and the images. Combining type with photography became important during this period. Modernists thought that photography was a better tool to portray reality than illustrations or drawings. One of the main figures of modernism is Massimo Vignelli. If you study his designs, you will see that he uses the ideals of modernism. Here are samples of his Unigrid system, which he designed for the National Park Service. Vignelli designed an underlying grid, which was used to unite the many brochures and printed materials that were designed for parks throughout the United States, thus creating a standardized look for all of their materials. He specified typefaces and styles for all the typographic components, such as body copy, headlines, and subheads. You can see he uses sans serif fonts, flush left paragraphs of type set into columns for ease of reading. He allowed white space to balance the elements. There is nothing decorative. The emphasis is on the ability of the reader to gather information on the park they are visiting. The end result is utilitarian, organized, and elegant. The modernist design movement began to be questioned in the late 1970s. Designers began to associate the ideals of modernism with corporate culture and commercialism rather than the high ideals of design. Graphic designers wanted to be seen as creative individuals, as artists and writers were considered, not as anonymous workers in service to corporations. These reactions developed into the movement known as postmodernism. Modernism had run its course. Postmodernism is a subject for another lecture, but here are some examples done by the postmodernist David Carson. Thank you very much for watching this lecture.